Welcome to meeting number 18 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. We recognize that we meet on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on June 18, 2025, the committee is commencing its study of federally recognized Indigenous communities without land or modern treaty. Before we go too far, I have a budget here that we need to adopt, and it is in the amount of $54,600, but that was for 4 studies and a whole bunch of things, so we will adopt that. I'm sure we're going to come under that. Is that okay? Do I see nodding heads? All right. Adopted. And so I think, Deputy Schmidt, you had your hand up there?
I did.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I would, in the essence of time, I won't read it out, but I'd like to move my motion of January 23rd, and I table that for discussion and potential vote.
It's fine with us. I do believe the minister has reached out to the chair and said when she was available. Thursday morning, I understand?
Thursday morning at 8:15 a.m. The minister will be available, so we'll have her there. And then well, first of all, I'm going to call. Any more discussion on this before I call for a vote? All right, all in favor of this? Okay, carried. Now that this is carried, the clerk can now also try and satisfy the other 2 witnesses if they're available on Thursday. It is short notice. We may have to have them come a little bit later. Okay, fair, good. Okay, MP Zimmer, you had your hand up.
I do, yes, Chair. We've put a modus on notion December 3rd and Wednesday of 2025, so that in light of concerns raised in the 2024 Giant Mine Oversight Board Annual Report and by multiple whistleblowers regarding unclear...
Oh. Go ahead.
Yeah, unclear project expenditures, inadequate financial controls, slower and incomplete responses to oversight recommendations, and significant long-term costs and engineering risks. The committee report to the House recommending that the Auditor General undertake a value for money and performance audit of the Giant Mine Remediation Project covering the period since 2015. I've been up to the mine site and even talked to many locals and many of these whistleblowers about the concerns. But I understand from my colleague across the way, Mr. Hanley, or Dr. Hanley, that he has an amendment that we're, I believe, amicable to.
MP Hanley.
Yeah, thank you for raising the issue, and thank you also for being open to an amendment. This is an important topic. I do believe there's that there is lots of good information as well for the public to be able to have access to on the Giant Mine Remediation Project. So without further ado, I'll read the amendment if the chair is willing. And the amendment is that given the importance of transparency and public confidence in the Giant Mine Remediation Project, and noting concerns raised in the 2024 Giant Mine Oversight Board Annual Report by stakeholders and partners, the committee writes to the Auditor General to consider, there's a typo there, undertaking a value for money and performance audit of the Giant Mine Remediation Project covering the period since 2015.
Do you accept that as a friendly amendment?
Yes, Chair, we do.
Thank you very much. So the original motion, now amended, is in order. I call for a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so now we are on to the study. On our first panel for the first hour, we have the Department of Crown, Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, Darlene Bess, Assistant Deputy Minister, Resolution and Partnerships, Danielle White, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Treaties and Aboriginal Government, and from the Department of Indigenous Services, Ian Kinney, Director General Governance Branch, and Laura Mitchell, Director General Lands and Environmental Management. Both of you will have 5 minutes, and then we'll go to questions. Thank you. Go ahead and begin.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Darlene Bess, and I am the Assistant Deputy Minister responsible for the Resolutions and Partnership sector at Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. I'm accompanied today by my colleague, Danielle White, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Treaties in Aboriginal Government. Nous sommes heureuses de nous joindre à vous depuis.
We're pleased to join you from the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people.
Expanding land is an important issue for First Nations across Canada. First Nations can increase their land base through modern treaties, self-government agreements, and other constructive agreements. Settling specific claims that involve land, especially treaty land entitlement claims, where land promised under a historic treaty was never fully provided. Separate from claims, First Nations may also increase their land base by purchasing privately owned land, fee simple land. Modern treaties, self-government agreements, and other constructive arrangements are an important way that the government and Indigenous communities can reach practical solutions to land issues. By addressing important questions such as land ownership, coordination of lawmaking, or shared decision-making, modern treaties and other similar arrangements can increase economic opportunities for Indigenous communities and create clarity and predictability over land rights. Canada is engaged in rights-based discussions with Indigenous partners across the country. At 160 discussion tables, Canada works with Indigenous partners and often with provinces and territories to identify key interests and reach arrangements that are workable for all parties. Land interests is a subject matter at 117 of these tables. Many Indigenous partners in modern treaty negotiations have a small land base, such as First Nations with a reserve. Modern treaties offer an opportunity to expand land ownership for Indigenous partners through the identification of treaty settlement lands, which can bring important economic development opportunities for these communities. Agreements can also include resource revenue sharing and economic benefit sharing agreements, predictable shared decision-making regimes in respect of lands and resources, and jurisdictional arrangements that support the coordination of lawmaking between levels of government, including Indigenous governments. Les terres acquises par les
Lands acquired through specific claims or purchased privately must go through the federal additions to reserves process to obtain reserve status. This process has been widely criticized as slow and unpredictable, often delaying housing and infrastructure projects and limiting economic opportunities.
réponses.
In response, the government is accelerating the ATR process, building on consultations with First Nations, as well as First Nations organizations over the past few years.
For many years, federal policy limited landless First Nations' ability to establish reserve lands, as proposals generally had to be tied to settlement agreement with Canada. In 2024, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada and Indigenous Services Canada, working with First Nations, made 9 changes to the additions to reserve policy. These changes now allow landless First Nations to submit proposals without a settlement agreement. This created a new path to reserve land for communities without reserve lands for generations, including Conseil de la Nation Mi'kmaq de Bec-Espag, whose reserve was established in December 19, 2025. To conclude, reducing barriers for landless First Nations is critical for both economic and cultural development of Indigenous communities. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous sommes...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're pleased to be able to answer the questions of the committee members and to participate in this exchange. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. As mentioned earlier, my name is Ian Kenny. I'm the Director General of the Governance Branch at Indigenous Services Canada, and I'm joined by my colleague Laura Mitchell, DG of Lands and Environmental Management. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about landless Indigenous communities. I will begin with the role of the Department in recognizing new bands under the Indian Act, which is one reason why a First Nation community might find itself without reserve land. Service aux Autochtones Canada offre et finance un...
Indigenous Services Canada delivers and funds a wide range of programs and services for the benefit of First Nations, Inuit and Métis, but because of the Indian Act and its provisions for the reserve system and the Indian Registry, the federal government has particular statutory responsibilities for First Nations people. Given that program eligibility may be based on residency on reserve and or registration under the Indian Act, access to specific programs and services by a member of a landless band may vary. As a result, a study of the impacts on a member of a landless band from the point of view of programs, services, and benefits is complex, and it would depend very much on each specific program.
I'm happy to say a few words about the specific function led by my team, the recognition of new bands under the Indian Act. Under Section 17 of the Indian Act, the Minister has the authority to create new bands and amalgamate or divide existing ones, subject to certain conditions being fulfilled. Also, under Section 2, a band could be created made up of a community whose members' status has not yet been recognized. Canada has formally recognized a very small number of First Nations in recent years, most often as a result of historical exclusion from recognition, specific court decisions, or claims-based processes. But while band recognition and reserve creation are related, they are separate. Being recognized as a band under the Indian Act does not, on its own, confer reserve land or automatic access to all federal programs tied to a land base. A band must first be formally recognized by Indigenous Services Canada before a reserve can be created. Additions to reserves, or ATRs, are a vital mechanism that enable First Nations to expand their land base, or in the case of newly recognized bands without reserve land, to establish one for the first time. ATRs allow First Nations to plan for future growth, to advance long-term community priorities such as housing, infrastructure, and economic development. The ATR process involves numerous external parties and steps, such as completing surveys, environmental reviews of proposed land, work to address any existing third-party interests on the proposed land, negotiating municipal services agreements, etc. The process is proposal-driven and largely led by the First Nation. In closing, the recognition of a new band under the Indian Act, while the first step in the process of reserve creation, is usually pursued with an expressed intention to establish a land base, recognizing that reserve creation is often central to long-term governance, effective service delivery, and longer-term community development. It's important that we continue to support these communities in navigating these complex processes to ensure they are positioned for stability, effective governance, and long-term success. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, and bienvenue, Monsieur Lemire.
Welcome, Mr. Lemire.
And I just wanted to welcome back to the committee. So we will proceed now with the first round of 6 minutes, and for the Conservatives, Jamie.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. A lot of the concerns we hear when we meet with Indigenous leaders that come to Ottawa and talk about the footprint of their nation, whether they buy land or the ability to go through the ATR process. And many are calling it, it's very cumbersome, it's time-consuming. The fact that there are no tight guidelines on when a decision can be expected are kind of comments we hear all the time. I know you outlined in your opening remarks a few things that your department is doing to speed up some of the applications that are going through, but at the same time, I think it is still a problem within the department itself, and I just want to relay the concerns that we are getting on this side from nations themselves. I don't know if you want to respond to that before I go into my line of questioning or not, but I just want you to know it is a concern we're hearing quite often.
Yeah, we've been at many conferences and in consultations with our Indigenous partners and have heard the same and are really working on that, but I'll let you leave some time for your questions.
Okay, maybe I could give you a list of some that have come to us for assistance in speeding up that process, and perhaps we can have a dialogue on which, where certain applications are in the process and when these nations can expect an answer, because I think that's the most frustrating part in a lot of these applications is nobody really knows. We've met with nations that have said they get a response within 8 months, which is quite fast, and I think that's quite impressive. But others have been waiting years for applications that seemed straightforward, land that was given to them by courts or general purchase that seemed quite straightforward on the surface. But the length at which it takes to actually get that approved is turning out to be quite frustrating. And I don't know if putting in tight timelines or maybe a schedule of when decisions can be made or decisions can be heard. If it's not done by a certain date, 8 months, a year, whatever, then it's automatically a yes. I think there should be something in there in your policies and procedures to ensure nations that there is the possibility of a yes or a no in a very quick fashion.
Thank you very much for those comments. Yes, those are things that I've heard as well. So we at CERNAC are in the process of redesigning the policy, and we've made some interim changes last year, 9 of them, to make some of it easier. We're looking to have consultations on the policy this spring, and so we have some drafts that are going out through circulations through a technical advisory group that we use for consultation on the policy development. But working with our colleagues in ISC, we realize that the policy alone can't change things, and as you've mentioned, service standards and more frequent communication would be better. So we've looked at things like, we're exploring things such as alternative service delivery models, and working on, looking at models where we can expedite the process. We have had some success stories in some First Nations, so drawing and learning from those experiences as to how we can focus everyone together, working with provinces and municipalities to avoid a lot of the back and forth, which is where we see a lot of the delays. But I'll pass it over to my colleague Laura Mitchell just to provide a bit more.
Yeah, it would be me that you should follow up with about the specific communities, and we would welcome that. Around your point around service standards, it's definitely something that we've been describing. The challenge that persists in the ATR process is that the federal government only has so many levers. There's a lot of partners that are involved in bringing an ATR to completion. Those include municipalities, but it's also like third-party interest holders, so that could be a hydro company. And you also have the issue of duty to consult. We need to go out and talk to other nations that may be implicated by the creation of that reserve. All of those things take a considerable amount of time in some cases and are only so much within our control. So we are looking at processes to sort of expedite these things, but also do a better project management approach. We have a new software. It's called NATS, the National Additions to Reserve Tracking System, which will sort of automate aspects of those processes that will, email a person if they haven't followed up on in a certain amount of time. We're hoping that as nations use that more and more, and as our regional colleagues use that more and more, and we're pretty good with new ATRs, it's older ATRs where that's more of an issue, we'll see some of those hiccups go away. But it's not an easy problem to solve. It's not a problem that a policy can solve alone. There's work that we're doing with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and work that we're going to need to look to do with provinces as well. So it's a very multi-pronged approach we're going to have to take.
So when we're talking about Indigenous people, for First Nations, for example, living off community, there are organizations that represent those people. For example, the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. I think the impression I get from them is the dialogue is not always as accessible with that department. They are often overlooked in conversations of national importance that they feel they should be part of. And I just wanted to know, are you actively dialoguing with them on issues that affect individuals, whether Métis or First Nations off reserve? Is this something that you're actually top of mind? Because there's been meetings that they've been shut out of, locked out of, pushed away, and yet we're having a study on this very issue, and majority of First Nations live off reserve. So is there some active dialogue going on?
Now that's all the time we have. We're a little bit over time, but perhaps that can come out in the rest of the answers through the session. So for 6 minutes, Jaime.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And During your discussion points, you talked about the importance of economic development through land and what additions to reserve or land base means to First Nations community. I'm wondering if you can expand on that a little bit and tell us, what are some of the things that we're hearing from landless bands that would help us with the economic development as well as residential areas for communities?
I'll be candid and say I have not had much dialogue with landless bands around economic development. My team does the additions to reserve process. There's another part of the Lands and Environmental sector that deals with economic development. I would not want to speak on their behalf, but I can say that the two programs that deliver economic development support are not residency based. So landless bands would be eligible for economic development funding under those programs. The challenge is that they may not have a place to do economic development that would be tax-free or like under their own governance and administration. But that would be a question I would want to take back to the economic development folks.
And how many landless bands are there currently in Canada that we've identified as legitimate complainants in Canada?
I think try that one. There's many layers of landless band definition, I have to say, but I know there's three that we know with no land at all, three recognized bands, that is. Halibut is one, New Westminster, British Columbia, and Wolf Lake, I believe, in Quebec as well. Mm-hmm. There's other bands, speaking again about Indian Act, recognized under the Indian Act, other First Nations that do have some land. They've purchased their own land, fee simple land, and are seeking to seek economic development opportunities on those lands. Again, the restriction there would be that they wouldn't have the benefit of some of the provisions of the Indian Act if it's not declared a reserve. So yeah, there's a few layers of what a landless band might be, but that's generally the shape that we see right now.
Okay, so I guess one of the questions I wonder is if there's only three that we recognize that this is a problem for. I've heard of other communities saying, that throughout the history, there's been a lot of problems. And so let me use the Nova Scotia example. In the 1940s, there were 47 different areas where Mi'kmaq resided. During the 1940s, they created a centralization movement with the province and the federal government that took those 47 different communities and said, we're going to centralize you to two. And there was an attempt during that time to remove all of the different areas. And so now after in the 1960s, there remained only 13 communities that were recognized by the federal government. Now, I've had people come to me and say, well, there was a First Nations Reserve here, a First Nation Reserve here, a First Nation Reserve here in Nova Scotia, but they have very loose ties to the ancestors of those communities, and they're saying, well, we should be recognized as a band. I guess my question around that is, how do we ensure that we look out for the abuses of those who would try to profit from something with very loose ancestries for areas that used to have First Nations communities?
The policy that we work under on the recognition of new bands, it's actually can be a fairly lengthy process as well, and that's because there is a fair amount of historical research that's done just to trace individuals back to that community. We work closely with CIRNA on that, doing the historical research, but there's a large amount of time dedicated to just actually making sure that the people who will be considered the founding members of a new First Nation or registered, if it's a case of individuals who are already registered under status Indians, just in making sure that the connections with that particular community are in place. So that is a major part of the work that's done currently.
And is part of that work also reaching out to the current recognized tribes or recognized bands within those areas for their input as well? Because a lot of times they'll say, well, we have no idea who these people are who are now claiming to be our family members, and I'm wondering what's the connection there and what's the process?
Yeah, that is part of the work, reaching out to neighboring communities, neighboring First Nations, bands who might have members from a newly recognized band might have members living elsewhere on other First Nations, for example. So part of the work does reach out to them to make sure that they understand what the process is happening and the implications for their own community.
Okay. I think I'm good, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Deputy Lemire, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's a bit emotional for me to be here at the table because, as you know, I had duties elsewhere, but I just want to take a minute to thank everyone around the table. This has been quite an exceptional committee for 2 years, great collaboration, especially with our colleagues on the side. But, Mr. Chair, John Aldag and all the others who have had at this committee, the analysts and our clerks over the years, thank you, everyone, and all the partners, Indigenous partners that we have had participating in our work. So this study, it's no coincidence, it's something that's very dear to my heart because there's a component of inequality that exists between those who have their status of reserve and lands and those who don't. So this procedure seems to have abruptly come to a halt in the 1970s. So those who went before, in our region, for instance, have prospered quite a bit, and others are having a hard time having the same privileges. Maybe privilege is not the right word, but the organizational resources, let's call it, that the others might have. So I'm trying to understand, and just to invite you to prioritize the cases of these communities. We will have some guests in the second hour of this, the second panel of this committee meeting. So first question, maybe to Ms. Bess and Ms. White, having a reserve status or giving a reserve status, is that a judicial imposition on the federal government, or is that more of a political decision?
I think that would just be a question for my colleagues at Indigenous Services Canada.
Parfait.
Sorry, are you talking about the actual creation of the land, like creating of a reserve, or the recognition of the nation?
Un peu les deux dans
Well, a bit of both, actually. What's the difference between a community that will get their status and reserve? Is that a political decision coming from the department? And if that's the case, who is blocking the procedure? And if it's a judicial process, is there a solution that might be available through the court system to communities that are interested?
Si je me permets, ça dépend des...
If I may, it depends on the circumstances of the community in question. In some cases, we have negotiations on land claims, and these are initiated with a court case or a claim filed with the department, and it takes negotiation to determine a land base for a community. Sometimes it's in a reserve. Sometimes in the north, let's say in the north above the 60th parallel, we have previously negotiated comprehensive settlements to establish a land base for these communities. So that is under Section 35 of the Constitution that refer to the rights to such circumstances. Well, often what you see is that these communities end up without the capacity to have long-term visions or even medium to short-term vision. And that as part of the responsibility of the federal government. Does it take goodwill to follow up on these things from the minister's side, from the department's side? And when there's a government change, because this is something that's been going on for the past 60 years, and there have been changes in the philosophy, in governments and ministers, many of them, in fact, and in the different departments that deal with First Nations and Indigenous communities. And every year, every single time, they sometimes are having to restart. So for this spring, I am pleased to hear about the serious process that will be undertaken, but how does it reflect on the government? Is it a priority that is set out by the minister? Are there concrete deadlines? Or will there be funds associated with this? And will these funds be dispersed to these bands or communities to finance these processes, which can be quite cumbersome?
This is definitely a priority of our minister, and we meet with our minister every week to provide status update on where we are, not just on the policy, but just some of the other ideas that we have to expedite the process. So definitely a priority, and some deadlines associated with that. There is a lot of follow-up from our, our deputy minister and our ministers as communities reach out, but even just follow-up when we haven't heard anything in a while. For instance, Wolf Lake, I think, is one that you're talking about, is where we are in the process of following up to find out what their status is on their additions to reserve submission. Laura and myself, are looking actively at the aging of our additions to reserve and looking at those that have been outstanding for a long time to try and get to the root of the problem of what the issues are, and working with First Nations communities. And I'll pass it to Laura just to maybe provide a bit more information.
Sure. Yeah, I can't speak to the process to recognize a nation, but once a nation is recognized, it's a proposal-driven process to access and add land to their reserve base. Some of the interim changes that were made make that easier for landless bands, and there is funding available. In 2021, there was funding that was set aside specifically to try and expedite the creation of additions to reserve funding. A lot of that went to supporting regional people to actually be able to work directly with nations to be able to advance those projects, but we've also set aside money for nations to be able to access to do things like surveys, environmental site assessments, all of the things that you need to do to be able to bring land into reserve status.
Merci beaucoup. MP Morin for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our public servants for coming today. Might jump a little bit all over the road here, but my first question is, in reading some of the material to prep, I think I saw a stat that said in spring of last year, I think it was from January to March, there were approximately 35 additions to reserve or additions to reserve created. Is that correct? That's actually pretty good in my opinion. I didn't actually realize it was that high. I guess a subsequent question is, how many have been completed since then? And is there a goal or milestone of the department to execute these, as of course I think the department would agree, and the political bodies at will would agree, that additions to reserve have become a priority to be more streamlined, as you've indicated in your testimony. Is there a goal, and what are those goals to execute even more?
Candidly, our goal is as many as possible. We know how much this is a priority for nations. It's a priority for our minister. This year, I think we're only at 36, like it's one since your last statistic. It is proposal driven, and because of that, we can't predict the complexity of the kind of ATR that will come in. As you can appreciate, an urban reserve creation is so much more complex and ends up taking a lot longer than if it's in a rural place and there's very few like municipal services or those things that are implicated. But I know that partners would very much like us to commit to timelines around, we will do this on a certain amount of time. My hesitancy around that is we can't, as the previous questioner posed, we can't just make a unilateral yes because there are other parties implicated. And because there are other parties implicated, committing to service standards that we are not unilaterally in control of presents pretty serious challenges. Our job is to be the convener and get out to those people and have conversations with municipalities and provinces and educate them too about what a reserve creation might look like in their municipality. There are a lot of examples of really great partnerships between nations and municipalities where they both see benefit to doing this. We just want to spread that good word, and hopefully that will help expedite some of these things as well.
Just looking back a little bit, would you say that there was political will to move 30 or 35 within a 3-month span as opposed to one in the last several months? Did that help?
Oh, sorry. I think the 35 is fiscal year to date. So that's not not January to March. My apologies. No. That would have been from April 1st of last year to January of this year. That number. So yeah.
I think other provinces aside from Alberta have been actually pretty successful in urban reserves. I think Saskatoon probably being the most prominent one. Are you aware of any, or you don't have to name the names if it's out of line, but of the First Nations applying, but are there any applications for Edmonton or Calgary currently underway?
I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head. I can look into that and come back to you. I do know both Edmonton and Calgary have followed up with my Director of Lands Administration to have conversations about the additions to reserve process and creating urban reserves. So there is interest. I don't know if there are any applications. I will have to look into that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. TLE, Treaty Land, Saskatchewan Treaty Land Entitlement, I think has been a success. All indications are no project is ever completely perfect, but as far as I know, from an Indigenous perspective, from a federal government perspective, and a provincial perspective, TLE Saskatchewan, that program since 1992 has actually been pretty successful, of course, bringing the province on board as well when it comes to administering and adding additions to reserve, or I don't know if it's creating new reserves, but adding additions to reserve. Can you give me your personal experience with that particular process and if it would be beneficial to other provinces?
I know that, honestly, it would be better to hear from the regional folks on those ones that have had implementation. I do know from hearing from them, they believe that the TLE frameworks have expedited the addition of reserve lands, in great part because it's a tripartite process. You have provinces at the table participating in that and being willing to see a process through. I know we've completed about 52% of the land that needs to be added in Manitoba. We're only at 35% in Saskatchewan, but they have a lot of ATRs in the system. And I do think there are probably lessons learned there that could be replicated. I'm not familiar with the creation of the TLE framework, though. I don't know what was the driver behind that. So I don't know how replicable that is. Like, I don't know what the catalyst was to create that.
You spoke about maybe regional differences, and maybe that might be the answer here. But can you, I think I also read in the material that, well, the testimony of one individual who might be coming up after you was there hasn't been a new reserve created in Quebec in quite some time. Can you speak towards why that would be for that particular jurisdiction?
Perhaps you can get that answer out later or provide that in writing. Okay, MP Hanley for 5 minutes.
Thank you all for being here and for the opportunity to ask some questions. I'm interested in the 2024 review carried out by Crown Indigenous and ISKN. Maybe just a bit of a larger context to understand what the impetus was for that review. I mean, clearly there were good reasons, but specifically what the impetus was for the review. Perhaps Ms. Best, you could lead off and interested in really what the key takeaways were, and also seeing some of the report and the findings. The process seemed to be really robust, and how you might apply the learnings from this report to other areas where maybe there's still some slower progress in moving forward in some of the key files.
Thank you very much for the question. So, I mean, the long story short, it's long and cumbersome, and there are many First Nations without reserve or without reserve creation. So, the work that we're doing at CERNAC is on the policy renewal and looking at how we can make the policy more efficient and faster for First Nations, but we can't do anything without hearing from those involved. So a lot of consultation work was performed over the last few years. We had a total of 180 First Nation-led and Canada-led engagement activities, and we actually generated 930 recommendations from those consultations on how to redesign the policy. So as you can imagine, trying to just put all of those recommendations together and meet everybody's needs is also a little bit difficult. So we are in the process. We have this technical advisory committee that provides technical advice and perspectives to support the development of policy options. So as we're going through the process of revising the policy and the directives and guidelines, we're working with them to make sure that it addresses those, not all 930 recommendations, but trying to consolidate the bigger themes there to get things moving faster and more efficiently. I think, one of the other things we're looking at just in general is the use of artificial intelligence and using digital transformation tools. We talked about communication and service standards. That would be a great way for us to be able to get back to communities in a more timely manner versus some of the manual processes that we currently have in the departments that we operate in. And Laura, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Sure. I think what surfaced through that was sort of 5 thematic areas that are challenging for reserve creation. Duty to consult it takes time. You need to engage the nations, and that can go well, or sometimes it doesn't go very well. Municipal service agreements, you need to have municipalities willing to provide the services on the reserve that's been created. That is a negotiation process. Third-party interest ends up being quite a hurdle. And so we've really focused in the implementation side on what can we do on each of those things to try and improve that process. And so we've entered into a consultation protocol with the Manitoba Métis Federation to try and help us smooth the way in Manitoba a little bit. We're looking at piloting some conditions that exist under legislation that we think we can do without policy change to maybe transition instruments. So we're looking at that without having to renegotiate them. And then we're partnering with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and a First Nations organization to sort of raise the profile of urban reserve creation and what that might look like. So on the implementation side, that's where our focus has been.
Can I just add, the other element is risk, right? So sometimes we have very stringent guidelines, but we have to also look at where we can, risk manage some portions of the process. So that is something that we're looking at as well in terms of renewing the policy and alleviating some of the burden.
Thank you. I noticed, and I know I'm running out of time, but I noticed one of the areas was alignment with UNDRIP and DRIPA and other like agreements. I wonder if you could comment on the influence of UNDRIP in particular on the policy renewal.
The consultation with Indigenous organizations and our partners is a key to the success of any policy, and hearing and listening to the concerns and needs is particularly important, which is part of the UNDRIP itself. So we take that very seriously, and along the way have been engaging and making sure that voices are heard, and that we're incorporating those concerns and issues into the development of what we would hope to be a better policy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Deputy Lemire, 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I have a document here sent to me by the Wolf Lake Chief. Since 1997, they have been coming up with lists of landless bands. And there were a dozen communities in Canada. And from what I see, there hasn't been much progress in the last 30 years. So would it be possible for you to provide to us in writing the complete list of communities that don't have reserve, that don't have land and status, as well as the current status of negotiations with these communities? And secondly, again, would it be possible, this more for my region, to have your commitment to look into the situations of communities such as Wolf Lake or the Témiscamingue First Nation, where it's a bit more complex because there's the municipal territory as well, and they're sharing the same land, as it were. So it's quite challenging. And in Kitsakik, for instance, that it's also another complicated case. So would you commit to making sure that there are concrete negotiations to put things into order with these communities?
For sure, and take that back.
Merci, puis je peux vous assurer ma...
Thank you. And if I can play a role as an MP, as the intermediary, I'd be happy to help. One last question. What are the challenges in terms of the negotiations with these communities? What kind of an impact does this process have? And I imagine you also are engaged in tripartite negotiations and people blaming each other, and you finally end up, well, with the status quo, and it of course doesn't have any advantages for the communities. It puts them in a tough spot.
I'll start and then I'll pass it to Laura. I think, there's a capacity within communities to look at some of these things and understand how to approach the situation in terms of accessing, submitting in addition to reserve submission. Over to you, Laura. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much of a better answer, but we do try and take a project management team approach, like get the right people around the table to be able to be engaged and move the process along. Certain provinces, that's easier than others. There is a policy in Quebec around reserve creation that's been on the books since 1982. I don't know how rigidly it's enforced, but it requires that the community have 200 members living together, that the ATR only be for the creation of housing. And that the land can only be aligned with how much the population, there's a formula. So policies like that can create challenges. Now, this is where you would need to speak to the regional folks, is I don't know how strictly enforced that policy is, but it is still on the books.
Miigwech.
Conservatives for 5 minutes, and Eric, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. I just have one question I want to ask about a nation in my riding in Northwest Ontario, Couchiching First Nation. It was promised land in Treaty 5 adhesion in 1910, so way back in 1910. I know that the community, the chief and many have been working with their neighbors in Sandy Lake and with the federal government as well to look for recognition and have that recognition. I believe in February of last year, ISC put a work plan together on the next steps to make that happen, but it does seem fairly quiet still. So I'm just curious on behalf of the chief and residents in Couchiching First Nation if someone can provide an update on where that is at.
This is about reserve creation?
Yes.
Yeah, I would have to follow up with you. We can get back to you on that. I would not want to speak out of turn. We'll follow up with the region and make sure. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll give the rest of my time to Mr. Schmerl if he'd like it.
Thank you very much. Again, because we're talking about land and what this means, I want to quickly jump over to the Cowichan decision. The government itself, in my opinion, was a little late in submitting not only their objections, but also their appeal. Now we have a question of whether Aboriginal title, where that lines up with fee simple property in the Land Title Act in British Columbia. Justice Young's decision seems to put into question sections 23 and 25 of that land title system. Given the fact that during the proceedings, which was one of Canada's, I believe it was Canada's largest court case, the arguments on behalf of the Cowichan lawyers did circle around land currently occupied within the limits of the city of Richmond. What outreach did the government do or the department do to inform residents that there could be some question put into their land in general over the ownership of it?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I just want to, this is not the scope of the study. I think that when we're talking about ATRs and when we're talking about landless bands, I don't think that the team would have prepared to be answering questions about land title section 35 and its impact on overlapping jurisdictions of sovereignty. If they have an answer, I'm more than happy to turn it over to them, but this is not what they were prepared to answer.
Are you prepared?
I can answer the question
Okay.
Thank you.
to the best of my ability.
You're okay
I
with
would
that?
argue otherwise we're doing a land study and this is...
Yes, so in terms of, I'll start with the last part of your question first. In 2017, Canada did, in its pleadings in court, did suggest that landowners within the claim area be made aware of the case, but it was in the context of the court proceedings. It wasn't a separate engagement, and that's why just a couple of weeks ago, Canada did, in response to Montrose, which is one of the private property holders in the city of Richmond, who asked their application to be added. Canada did support their application to be added to the case. With respect to the broader decision, as you know, Canada appealed the lower court ruling at the same time as the other parties. Canada disagrees with certain elements of the court's decision, and all parties have appealed, so we do expect there will be an appeal. Further legal clarity is required to address the very questions that you raise, and its broader implications, particularly around private property rights. In terms, we'll continue to work collaboratively with all of the parties.
to uphold the principles of reconciliation, transparency, and to meet our legal responsibilities. And we are remaining available for dialogue with all of the parties as the court case proceeds. On the broader question, though, I would just point to, in contrast to the Cowichan case, the work that's been done on Haida Gwaii and the Haida Title Agreement, which has been reached, where we've been able to reach a negotiated solution outside of the courts and resolving an important question of Aboriginal title. And we continue to prefer negotiations as the way to resolve these issues as opposed to fighting them out in court. But we will continue to defend Canada's position before the courts.
So on that point, I know it's still before the courts, but are discussions happening through legal channels or otherwise before it actually continues on this path?
Sorry. I'm not aware of the specifics. Right now, most of the discussion is through the council, but should the parties want to have discussions on a without prejudice basis, Canada would entertain that.
I recently met with residents from the city of Richmond and members of Richmond Council, and as well as the leadership within the city. They expressed frustration on behalf of the federal government and the province too, to be honest with you. The fact that communication, they say, is very limited on when they try to get information, to try to get an idea of where the federal government wants to go with this. There seems to be no dialogue coming from the feds, but also the province. It's getting better with the province now that they've stepped in to backstop those trying to renew mortgages in the city limits in the affected areas. But the claim still is that the federal government has been lax in their dialogue with the people being impacted, and that's left it all up to the city to provide this leadership or the interaction with constituents that have a number of concerns with this, and they just feel alone.
We're way over time on the time allotted, so perhaps you can carry on this conversation afterwards. Thank you. And for the last slot for 5 minutes, MP Lavac.
Thank you very much for being here with us and appearing before the committee today. Ms. Vess, you mentioned in your opening remarks that it's essential to reduce and get rid of obstacles when it comes to bands acquiring lands. Could you let us know what are the biggest obstacles and challenges, maybe the top 3 or 5, that will be critical that we need to take care of? Could you let us know what these are? Thank you for the question. I think Laura Mitchell will be better positioned to answer the question.
I would say 5 broad categories of challenge for reserve creation. I've spoken about some of them today. Environmental site assessments were a challenge. Some of the changes that we've made with the interim guidelines have helped that. There's no longer a requirement to update the ESA if it goes beyond 5 years and there's been no significant changes to the land. That helps reduce some of the burden there. The duty to consult, we are still developing tools and things like that. That's going to be a persistent challenge. Like, not all nations will agree on the boundaries of their territory and whose land should be added or not. Municipal service agreements, I've spoken a little bit about some of the stuff that we're trying to do there with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, but also just templating things, like creating tools that are really practical for communities to be able to use when they have those conversations. Letters of support from Canada sort of saying we support this, and therefore when you're engaging with the municipality, please know that Canada is aligned with your vision for reserve creation. Third-party interests, we're looking at some ability to maybe not have to replace those with Indian Act interests under once a reserve is created. That can lead to long delays in reserve creation, so we're looking for some creative solutions there. We are piloting something. We have not discussed it with the nations that we're hoping to pilot it with, so I do not want to speak about it very much here, just for fear of getting in front of them, but there's work at play there. Actually, those are the major capacity issues, sorry, is the 5th one. A nation may only do one reserve in every 10 years. So it's an it's a skill set that takes a lot of time to learn, and then you may not get to practice it very often. And so we're looking at creative solutions around, is there an external First Nations organization that could kind of come in and provide some of that capacity support to nations so that they don't have to build up the muscle of knowing how to liaise with the municipality around negotiating those things. They have somebody that they can go to that isn't the federal government, that they would feel confident in having those conversations with. And so that capacity could be moved around the country a little bit more rather than trying to develop it in individual nations. So we're looking at some models for that sort of thing. But those are the 5 major areas of delay around reserve creation, and they sound very easy to say in a room like this and very difficult to deal with practically with the number of players around the table. So it is, yeah, it's a complex process. Policy reform will help, but it's going to continue to be a complex process.
Can I just add to that? I would say the other part of it is, relationships with provinces and municipalities is a key part of expediting the processes and having working tables with the provinces and municipalities to look at those that are kind of stuck between all of these different layers of government. So that is something that we're working on as well. And just in response to a previous question, we have a target of 70 additions to reserve this year. We're at 36 right now, so we're getting close to the end of the fiscal year. Last year we did 67, so just wanted to put that out there.
Prochaine question, vous avez mentionné aussi.
Next question, you also talked about implementing, or rather the use of new software and new tools that is now making a difference in your procedures. Are there other elements you're looking into, you're considering that would have an impact and maybe help with the administrative backlog or the challenges?
We have looked at whether we can use AI to address the administrative backlog. Unfortunately, the data in the way that we have it is not such that we can use it with AI systems. Some of it is handwritten, or it requires a lot of analysis to get into a system, so we don't think that AI can be useful for looking at historical files. We're looking at process automation a little bit, but that's already built into the National Additions to Reserve system that we've looked at. The other thing where AI doesn't help us, and Darlene just referenced this, is relationships are so critical to the advancement of ATRs, and we don't yet have AI that can help us with that, unfortunately. So that's been a shortcoming. But we are certainly trying to look at how we can be creative, and as AI advances and evolves, and as we become better with our digital footprint around what we have data on for reserves, we may find new avenues, but what we've looked at, we're doing what we have looked at so far and remain open to possibilities, but we think we've maximized its ability currently.
Thank you very much. And that
Mr. Chair,
brings us-
point of order?
Yes?
Yeah, just the motion we just passed, I just wanted some clarity. It calls for a letter to be written by the chair and perhaps the clerk. What would be the timeline when that letter will be issued and sent?
I'm sorry, which motion are you referencing?
The one that, the letter that the committee writes to the Auditor General to consider an undertaking a value for money and performance audit of the Giant Mine remediation project. When do you expect the letter will be issued?
As quickly as possible. I'll work with the clerk and the analyst to make sure that we are doing it expeditiously. So
awesome.
We'll do that for sure.
Thanks for clarity. Thanks, Chair.
And thank you very much to our first panel. We're going to suspend, and we're going to do this quickly because we have 4 witnesses coming up. So please do this quickly. And thank you very much. Merci. This is the second round, and today we have the Assembly of First Nation. We have Grand Council Chief, the Anishinaabe First Nation, and welcome Daba C. Gay. Good to see you. And we also have Helen Pavula, Chief of the, and I don't know if she's here yet, but we'll wait for a minute. She's probably just coming in the room. Online, we have Chief Celine Kassavi, La Nation Micmac de Gazpeg. We have Long Point First Nation, Stevie Matisse. Chief from Wolf Lake First Nation, Lisa Robinson, Chief. They're online, so the folks online, if you want to get our attention or you're having an issue, there's a raise hand button. Please push that. Each member will have, each of the four groups will have 5 minutes for a presentation. And welcome, Chief Robinson. Good to see you. And so we have the 5 minutes, and then we have, each member will have a certain amount of time in which to ask and answer the questions. If you find you had more to say, you can always provide in writing too as well. If you feel that you wanted to continue on with some of your explanation, or if you after you leave and you say, hey, I thought of something else, please send it to us in writing. That is equally considered. So thank you very much. And without further ado, we will begin with Chief Linda Duba C. Gay.
Mr. Chair, my name is Linda Dubosky. I'm the Grand Council Chief for the Anishinaabe Nation in Ontario. Thank you for your ongoing work on land restitution. Your study on land restitution provided a clear roadmap for how Canada can meaningfully advance reconciliation by returning lands to First Nations. That same spirit applies to the work before you today as it relates to First Nations that do not have land bases and have been overlooked in treaty matters and/or national policy discussions. While there are relatively few First Nations without reserve lands, the consequences are profound. Canada often refers to these nations as landless bands. The question then becomes, why did this happen, and what are the implications for the original peoples of this land? One more likely scenario is that the Crown did not count them at the time of treaty making, as Robinson had done just prior to 1850 and admitted to. Without land, these First Nations cannot build sustainable communities, support housing and infrastructure, or restore their economic, cultural, and spiritual foundations necessary to thrive. Today, we see legislation like Bill C-5 and Bill 5 in Ontario that aim to fast-track access to First Nation mineral resources wealth, but we are also engaged today in a painfully slow process that drags on the return of lands to the rightful owners. Perhaps if Canada had the political will and the thoughts of true reconciliation, we might just get some faster movement on the return of lands to the rightful owners. For generations, First Nations have sought to work with Canada to create clear, effective, efficient pathways to regain the lands they are entitled to, lands that were unlawfully taken through colonial policies or just a miscount at the time of treaty. Common sense tells us that because there were no roadways back in the 1800s during the cull of First Nations people, there were First Nations people who were missed. Yet even the basic picture is unclear. Historical and ongoing research points to fewer than 30 landless First Nations, but only Indigenous Services Canada holds comprehensive data. That lack of clarity reinforces the challenges and invisibility these nations experience. Just as Robinson had acknowledged his mistake in the RG-10 files, ISK needs to admit their mistakes and allow access to the comprehensive data. Addressing landlessness is not just a technical issue, it is a fundamental question of rights, justice, and reconciliation. The honour of the Crown should not be an obstacle in returning the land to the rightful owners. Justice means prioritizing those who remain without land recognition or secure jurisdictional relationship with the Crown. Advancing legislative recognition of some groups like the Métis while ignoring other rightful title holders like Chief Pavula is deplorable and leaves foundational injustices unresolved. I will now hand over the remainder of my time to Chief Pavula, who is joining us virtually and is also a member of our nation.
Robinson, would you like to add to those comments in the 5-minute section, or you?
I'll just let
go ahead with Chief Pavla, and I'll take my turn later.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Okay, online we have La Nation, Micmac de Gas Bay. Is it online? Do we have them online?
Oui.
She
Okay.
asked for Chief Pavla.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Faut comprendre que
Point of order, Chair. I think they are splitting their time, and it's Ms. DeBassige's second part of this is her time says we're not going to a new witness, so we're still sticking with the first group that they should be able to continue.
Perfect. Proceed.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. It is an honor to join you today. I am Helen Pavla. I'm Chief of the Nemic-Sagan First Nation. We are a near band, and we're located in the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory. We are currently going through the process for recognition through the federal court. We had submitted an application to the federal court in December 2018, and why we did that is that this policy, the NDBA policy, does not take into consideration near bands, the situations that we find ourselves in. We do have land. We are recognized First Nation members. We are all status. We have our a community that is situated. So what I find is that this policy does not take into any consideration that we are already, a situated First Nation. Well, with that, there's so much more I can say, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention that the policy needs to be looked at and that it needs to really consider the near bands that are located in Ontario itself and the other provinces. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. Okay, and now we'll go back online. Sorry, and I apologize for the order mix-up. My notes were different. So La Nation Micmac de Gaspé will be next, please. Go ahead, Chief.
Bonjour, Goué. Mon nom est Céline.
Hello, my name is Céline Cassivi. I am the chief of the Gaspé community. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to appear before the committee today. Recognition and support from the federal government are essential if communities like ours are to realize their autonomy and protect their culture. Today, I would like to share our community's history, the challenges we have faced, and our hopes for the future. Our community has worked for generations to obtain the reserve. Many chiefs and councils before us have devoted years of effort, often without success. Their work paved the way for us to move forward today. Realizing this dream is a great accomplishment because it brings to fruition the efforts of those who came before us. The absence of a reserve all these years has had far-reaching consequences. Our members have had to disperse far from their ancestral lands to work or access services. This has weakened the transmission of our languages, traditions, and cultural knowledge. Access to federal programs and funding has been very limited, and recently our community had access to only 3 grant programs, while other communities could use up to 27. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we received very little financial assistance simply because we had no reserve. These difficulties show that the lack of territorial recognition affects our economic, social, and cultural development. Over the past few years, we have been working to prepare for the creation of our reserve. With the new conditions, we opted for an accelerated process. We submitted an official form and followed a structured work plan. The official response came after about 18 months. Creating a reserve in Quebec is a rare event. It hasn't happened for over 50 years, which just goes to show how important and complex this process is. The creation of a reserve will enable our community to strengthen our cultural and spiritual ties with our territory, ensure that our children and grandchildren can grow up surrounded by their culture and language, access more federal programs and resources to support our social and economic development. We recommend that the federal government continue to support reserve creation processes and accompanying programs, and ensure that all communities without recognized reserves have fair access to resources and subsidies. Our community is proud of what has been achieved, but we still know that there's a long way to go. We are sharing this brief so that our voice, our experience, and our vision for the future can be heard and understood. We hope that the committee can use this information to support all communities in similar circumstances. Thank you for your attention.
And next, we will go to Long Point First Nation, Chief Mateus.
Kwe, bonjour, good afternoon. My name is Chief Steve Matthias. I'm from the Long Point First Nation, member of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, and want to first welcome you on the Algonquin unceded territory where you're having this parliamentary standing committee session right now. So Wenaway is where we're situated today, and we're considered as an Indian settlement. We have a membership of about 1,000 members on our band list, and we have about around 600 members living in the community of Wenaway. We have all the infrastructures, in terms of housing, public buildings. We have our school, we have our nursing station, we have our band office, our community hall. We have about 12 public buildings in the community, and we have around 120 some houses. And how Wenaway came about is that because we were originally located at Long Point, Kakinwa-Wigak, which is on the shores of the Ottawa River, which is now known as the Lac des Quinze here in Quebec. And we were forced to relocate at two separate occasions. We were initially flooded by a hydro dam development, and so that we were forced to relocate upstream of the Ottawa River to Sandpoint. And then there was another development, and I'm going back about a century ago. And in the late 1930s, then they had another hydro development project, and our ancestors took part of the construction of that small little mini hydro power plant, where they had to build some dikes upstream, 7 dikes to stock up water in the winter months, the main dam, and all the hard labor was provided by our ancestors to build all those infrastructures, including a 26-kilometer transmission line to provide the electricity to a mining project. So we were really impacted by the development, this economic development back then by the industry, at the benefit of also of the Crown, without any compensation, without any meaningful consultation either. And we trace back, we're doing some research right now where we found some letters that were sent to the federal government in 1906 from one of our former chief, namely Chief Pierre Augustin, who requested reserve land in 1906 prior to getting flooded. And Quebec at the time had set aside 230,000 acres of land for reserve purposes. And when that application or that the request was made, the answer was there was 581 acres remaining out of that 230,000. And we still don't have the status reserve here where we are now in Winaway. The missionary oblates in the mid 1950s or in the early 1950s obtained a lease from Quebec, and it was 2 half lots totaling around 116 acres of land, and it was to they obtained those lands, for religion and education purposes. So we built all those lands, and where I'm sitting here today, I'm at the administration office of Algonquin First Nation, and most of all of our public buildings and residentials, homes are situated on those lands. And we engage at more than one occasion and to try to resolve the situation of my community.
Chief, if I could just to finish up a little bit, and then we'll get more out of what you're saying through the testimony. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I heard you mentioning earlier, that if we have anything to add later, we can do that through in writing. I'm on the edge of finalizing a brief that I would submit to the standing committee on this file. So yeah, well, just to wrap up though, is that it's been quite a challenge, and I've been chief here for nearly 20 years, and it's very challenging, to resolve this situation here because of the different policies and either at the provincial level or at the federal level. So I'm hoping, that this exercise we're doing is going to be able to facilitate things in the future. Miigwech.
Chief Miigwech, thank you. Chief Robinson, please. Thank you.
And I too would also like to welcome everybody to unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory.
Please turn on the microphone for
Open your mic and
Chief.
Linda.
Okay, perfect. You want me to redo that?
Let me see. Try again. It's not working.
Working? Okay. I'll slide over. Thank you. Okay.
You can start from the beginning, please.
Okay,
Thank
sure.
you.
So, Kwe Kikina, Lisa Nadijnakaz, Mogdodem, Megan Sagagan, Nodojaba. And I too would like to welcome you to unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm here today to present on behalf of Wolf Lake First Nation, a historic Algonquin nation that has been recognized by the federal government for generations, yet remains without a reserve. This is not a new issue. Algonquin chiefs have petitioned the Crown for land for more than 200 years. Canada has been on notice for 2 centuries. What has changed is not the legitimacy of our request, but how long Canada expects us to wait. This situation is not a result of legal uncertainty. It is the result of administrative choice. Wolf Lake is described as landless, but that term is misleading. We are not landless. We have always had our territory, a territory that we have occupied, governed, and cared for by our people long before Confederation. We are reserveless because Canada has failed to fulfill its obligation to set aside reserve lands. That failure has real consequences. Without a reserve, our members are excluded from infrastructure, housing, and essential services. Services without land is not a remedy. They leave communities like ours in perpetual insecurity. And the cost of that failure is paid every day by our people. We have done everything that Canada has asked of us. We have submitted claims in the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, and more recently a specific claim in 2018. Negotiations began in 2020. Canada created timelines and systems intended to deliver resolution. Yet years, even decades later, we remain without a land base. When the systems that Canada relies on, whether negotiations or tribunal processes, extend over many years without tangible results, the process itself becomes a substitute for justice. Delaying justice is not neutral. It actively harms the people of Wolf Lake. And that harm is now irreversible. Because we were denied a land base, our nation has been dispersed across jurisdictions. This dispersal was not voluntary. It was the consequence of policy failure. The current generation of elders is the last with lived memory of Wolf Lake together as a community gathered on our land. As they pass, that irreplaceable knowledge, continuity, and living history are lost. No future settlement can restore what is being lost through delay. At this stage, time itself has become the harm. This dispossession has also created real division within our community. Families have been forced to live apart, to organize separately. And that division is not a failure of our people. It is the result of being denied the land that makes unity possible. Canada knew who we were, where we were, and how to act. As in other cases, it did act. We remain caught in a jurisdictional loop where responsibility shifts and nothing moves. An impasse only in federal leadership can break. This committee has already recognized these failures in its 2023 report, Reclaiming the Land. INAN called for concrete measures to restore land to First Nations and for clear pathways to resolve historical obligations. Wolf Lake First Nation is a test to whether those recommendations will be implemented. I also want to note a growing contradiction. The government has shown that it can move quickly when it wants to or chooses to. Yet when it comes to reconciliation and providing a land base to a historic First Nation, we are told the system cannot move. Chair, I will conclude with this. We are not asking anything our past chiefs have not already asked for. We are asking that our elders, while they are still with us, have the opportunity to be together as a community on our land. Canada knew who we were, where we were, and how to act. The absence of reserve for Wolf Lake First Nation is not an accident. It is a choice that can and must be corrected. The question before this committee is no longer whether the problem exists, but when Canada is prepared to act, our nation is ready. Miigwech.
First round will be 6 minutes, and MP Moran, please, for the Conservatives.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you to all our guests. Chiefs, acknowledge you. I'll start with Chief Robinson. So as I understand, you are a recognized band with status, but you do not have reserve creation lands. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. We've always been recognized by Canada. And the land issue remains today.
Can you just maybe get into the detail, not too much because we only have so much limited time, but like this fight has been ongoing for decades.
Yes.
What is the actual excuse to not, like I got Wolf Lake up here on my my screen on Google Maps. Quebec and Canada are huge, the second biggest country in the world and the biggest province in the country. Wolf Lake as a small settlement maybe is minuscule. What is the excuse that they can't give that to you as a reserve?
Well, for us, it's not about policy or processes. It's about the political will to do it. Wolf Lake has been, recognized by Canada for years. In our history, we're told, we had Chief Petremont that came and petitioned for reserve in the 1880s. And since then, we've gone through all of these processes. We've had early petitions to the Crown. We've been recognized, when bands started being recognized in 1951, formal lists. In the 80s, we were really close through a ATR process led by Chief Maness. Unfortunately, Canada unilaterally pulled the plug on that process. Then fast forward into the 90s, we've submitted different claims. The Indian Claims Commission came into being. The process was rejected. And then eventually the specific claims process came into being. And that's where we stand today. So it's all of these processes and decisions that Canada has made. And it is these decisions that Canada can make to resolve this, to solve this land issue for the people of Wolf Lake.
On a broader context of not just specifically a piece of reserve land, I'm assuming Wolf Lake gets all the same benefits of being an Indian band, which is consultation on the broader territory alongside other First Nations. Is that correct as well?
Okay, so...
And I could be wrong in my assumption, by the way.
No, actually there is... the position we find ourselves in is still quite detrimental to Wolf Lake. We continue to be marginalized. We do not have access, as I mentioned earlier, to funding regarding infrastructure, capital projects, but also land. We know that land is much needed to, create an economy, but also to have the space to maintain our identity and our culture. So for us, it's a bit of a challenge. Maybe can I get you to re-say your question again, just to make sure I'm...
If there was a project being developed outside of in the traditional territory, maybe a concentric, I'm just...
consultation.
Yes,
that's what
yes.
Okay.
Do you still go through those same processes?
Yes, we do. For that, though, we have had to fight to be included in some of those processes as well. It's unfortunate that within our territory, where we're situated, our territory extends on both sides of the Gitchisibi or the Ottawa River. So you also have that jurisdictional boundary, which is today Ontario and Quebec. And our recognition on one side is better than it is on the other,
Which
even
side?
though it's our territory.
The Quebec side would be a
Yeah.
little bit more recognition there?
A little bit,
Okay.
yeah. But in Ontario, it's a challenge. And then also in Ontario, you have other entities or groups that are also being consulted and being parts of decisions that are, projects on our territory. So it has huge implications that us not receiving the proper recognition, I'll call it, of a recognized land base leaves us in limbo.
And just one last question for you. What's the population roughly of the community, nation?
300.
300 people.
And that's no fault of our own. We've had a lot of our members that have left and, to secure housing in neighboring communities, to have access to more programs and services as well.
Maybe one more question for you. Are you part of any tribal council?
We are, and we're part of the Algonquin Nation Secretariat, which has been involved in a lot of these processes that the AFN has been involved in Canada as well in terms of developing this policy. But with that effort, I don't know if things are really going to come to fruition. I hope they do, but, there's been a lot of involvement through our tribal council as well that has supported us in this work and to making sure that, we're doing everything to move forward.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
How much time, Chair?
Go ahead if you have some more time.
I just wanted to go to Chief Pavola. And I was curious if your situation correlates with Chief Robinson's, where, correct me if I'm wrong, you are recognized status Indians band title, but just landless. Is that correct?
My First Nation, we're unrecognized federally as of yet. We are going through the process through the courts. Because we did try to go through the policy, and the policy just doesn't work. Like it was just one thing after another. Canada kept coming back with other things that they wanted from us. But my First Nation, my members, we are status Indians. And we do have a situated community, so we're not landless. But everything the chief said before me is stuff that we're dealing with. Consultation is really hard. We can't really get into other projects that are happening around us because we're constantly being But yeah, it's just hard because we're not recognized federally by the government yet.
Thank you very much, Steve. And you'll be able to answer some more questions as we go along too. We're just a little over time there. Next for 6 minutes, Philip, please, for the Liberals.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses. I'm going to direct my questions to Chief Céline Sevier. I think I've got the name right. Thank you, Chief, for the brief that you submitted and the brief that you gave us today. And my attention was drawn to a portion of the written brief that I have in my package that talked about you wanting to tell the committee about your experience and your band's experience, the multi-generational consequences of not having a reserve. So I look at multi-generational as youth, adults, and elders. And I want you to, if you can, break that down and tell us more about the impacts of this journey, or the impacts that the journey has had on your youth, your adults, and the elders.
Bien, tout d'abord, un grand point.
Well, first off, GESPEG is working really hard on one particular issue. We completely lost our language. We don't even have one single member of our community who speaks the Mi'kmaq language. We lost our culture as well. We have about 2,000 members, status members, on the Gaspé-Wagi territory. But in Gaspé proper, we have about 800 members. But it's a bit of a diaspora. People are spread across, and it's been a challenge to keep the culture intact. So it's a day-to-day challenge to really take ownership of our culture. We are a recognized community, but we did not have reserve status. Now, it has happened. We have that status since December 2025. So we took advantage of the accelerated procedure, filled out the form and everything. So it's quite positive for GESPEG.
Oh, thank you. So your community has been on this journey for 16 years, and you arrived in December 2025 at the conclusion of your community being recognized. Can you tell our committee about some of the experiences that you may have had on the 16-year journey to help us, when we write a report, to be able to see improvements in this regard?
Les gens qui ont passé devant.
The people that came before us, previous chiefs, the councils, worked really hard We had attorneys as well supporting us. So we always got the same answer. They told us we belong to the Listiguch community, but they were the neighboring community. We are part of the Gaspé-Giwagi in the Gaspésie. We are part of the 3 Mi'kmaq communities. They told us we are part of Listiguch, but it's a 4-hour drive from where we are. So it made no sense. So year to year, mandate to mandate, each chief worked towards the creation of our reserve. And about a year and a half ago, we were informed about the new procedure, the new forms that we could fill out and submit so that we would have assistance along the procedure. So we had everything to gain, and we opted for that. It's been quite challenging. We had people working full-time on this file, and it took about a year and a half until we got the positive answer.
In an earlier session with the Government of Canada representatives from both CERNAC and Indigenous Services Canada, we heard about some particular criteria within the province of Quebec. The community must have 200 people, largely established to develop housing. Is there anything unique that you may have learned as in being recognized both by Canada, you've described that, but by Quebec that may be of interest to our committee?
Je comprends pas la question.
I don't quite understand the question.
Just have a little bit of time left, so.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Yeah.
Okay, you okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Merci. Okay, Deputy Lemire, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. I think this has been quite impactful, and it's one of the objectives I had. It was to hear these testimonies. When the election campaign was called, the first day, I went to Lisa Robinson's office, and the office actually is a donation from a chief that came before Lisa many generations before. So these are communities that have their own buildings. These were not financed by federal or government funding. So that goes to show that these communities have been abandoned, really. I think we can use the word. So I was there on day one, and also at the premises of the Long Point First Nation with Mr. Mathias. So one of the things that I find shocking, and my question will be for Lisa, where are you in terms of your discussions with the government? Are there formal dialogues towards the recognition of a reserve status or equivalent status, land recognition? Where are you in those discussions?
So, as I stated earlier, in terms of us at Wolf Lake, we have entered into negotiations in 2020. So since that, we've been engaging in Canada's process, and this is the most recent process that I'm more familiar with. And I know the chiefs before me have had different processes as well that I recently mentioned in terms of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. In this current process of negotiation, it has been challenging because when I entered into these negotiations and we received a mandate letter from Minister Bennett at the time, in her letter, she referred to a comprehensive process for the people of Wolf Lake. But in the negotiation, it is far from comprehensive. Since then, we've had Minister Miller, Minister Anana Sangri, and today we have Minister Alti. We also have a departmental split that happened. You have CERNAC, and you also have ISK. And when we talk about reserve creation, we know that we need to involve ISK, but, some of the messaging I get is the ping pong. Who do we talk to? But really, what is needed for the people of Wolf Lake is a political mandate to do the right thing for the people of Wolf Lake, for us to have justice and to resolve this issue.
Ce jeu politique-là de...
This political ping pong ends up meaning that you are at a disadvantage with regard to achieving that status of having a reserve. So the relations you have with the community in Temiskaming and the Kabawek neighboring community, I can say that the relations are excellent. The Temiskaming community had the will to cede a part of their territory. Of course, it's your decision. Maybe you will have public consultations with your members to accept that land or not. But in the Temiskaming region, there is a real will to welcome you as a community with a formal territory and with the government of Quebec. What is pumping the brakes on, if you will, in terms of you making further advances?
What is putting the brakes on? It's just the political will of Canada, as I've stated time and time again here. You know, and I do appreciate your comment regarding the relationships with Wolf Lake. We have, had discussions with our neighbors, our sister community at Kabawek and the municipality as well. And, we also have a fairly good relationship as well with the local MRC, and those are key. But at the end of the day, it's not policy and administration, that is what has bogged us down. And it's those changes that were made, unilaterally, that continue to keep us in the situation that we are. I don't have any solutions, but Canada really needs to decide what are they going to do. What is Canada going to do for us?
Et garder un dialogue en continu.
And having continuous dialogue is essential in all this. Mr. Mathias, could you let us know on your end what is blocking, what is an obstacle in terms of establishing a reserve? A lot of progress has been made. As far as I can tell, you appeared before this committee a couple of weeks ago. But what's the obstacle as we speak?
I believe you're on mute.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Bon après-midi, Monsieur Lemire.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lemire. Well, I think there are many elements that explain the situation we find ourselves in today. Several aspects of the current situation have been created without input from members of the band, and this put us in quite complex situations. There is a policy that determines the number of square kilometers. There's a formula that exists at the provincial level, and we are looking at 9.5 square kilometers. So this is only based on residential requirements. So, but we also want to build an economic basis, or base rather. We are looking past survival and focusing on the long term for the community, and that is why we need to have an economic base. So geographically speaking, we're not right next to a highway. It takes a bit of effort to get to where we are. So we are semi-isolated in a forest. So our economic base would mean access to different territories and natural resources, and this is a key issue. Thank you very much.
Next one, we're over time. Merci. MP Schmale for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Sometimes when the order of committee, you sometimes look at the agenda and think, oh, would it be nice to have the department officials after this panel, because we could just go to them and ask the questions. Hey, you're hearing the testimony. What's the response? And unfortunately, they went first. But in my original line of questioning, I did mention about nations that we on this side of the House meet with quite often. And usually when we're having conversation, the ATR process is probably on the top 3 of the list of discussions we're having. And I would never name a nation in a committee setting like this without the direct permission, but we do have a lot of concerns about the process and the timeline. And part of my questioning in the first round was there's a lot of application that seem on the surface quite straightforward and should be quite easy to approve. In this case, what I'm getting from you, Chief Robinson, is it seems pretty straightforward. You want the ability to set up, start your path forward, and right now we're still waiting. And we just had another chief just a second ago we're talking about 9 kilometers, square kilometers, I believe he said, which in the scheme of things seems pretty small and reasonable, especially as my friend beside me, Mr. Moran, just pointed out, it's still Crown land at the end of the day due to the legislations that's been put in place. So the fact that we continue to have hurdle after hurdle and this slow process, and again, I pointed this out in the first round, of applications that seem straightforward. So I know you've answered many questions on this. I know there's other barriers, and it's just overly frustrating. I don't really have a question on this, and you've added a lot, so I'll give you if you wanted to respond, fire away, but I do have questions for Grand Council Chief beside you.
It's not an easy answer, these processes that were created. And, first off, I just want to state that we're not facing legal uncertainty. Mm-hmm. We make sure we understand that. And ultimately, it's Canada that has the authority to create a reserve. And they've exercised that for other Algonquin communities as well. But the unresolved status where we find ourselves is actually an administrative barrier. So right now we're asking for that clear political direction. And in terms of these processes, and I'm just going to speak here. In the 1980s, we were close. We had site selection, we had land, and there was a momentum of hope for the people of Wolf Lake. I remember being a little girl when those consultations were happening, and there was excitement, thinking that we would be situated together as a community with my grandparents nearby. And that was unilaterally stopped. The plug was pulled. We don't know why. And then fast forward along into the earlier 2000s, we're promised, an expedited process. And I have reports here. This is from 2000 about reserve acquisition process. So it's a long history of these colonial processes that has stopped this and has taken from us. And it has to change. And that's what I'm asking this committee to do, is to do that work.
Well, I'm pleased to say that the Director of Lands and Environmental Management has stayed in this committee. She is behind you, and in the previous panel, I don't want to put her on the spot or anything like that, but she did commit to looking into any files that we have outstanding, and maybe my recommendation through you, Chair, to Ms. Mitchell is this is one maybe we can have a dialogue with after the committee and maybe dive into a little more. Grant.
To be fast-tracked, expedited, and now today's term is comprehensive, and they're far from it. So I just wanted to share that too.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Grand Council Chief, I know we were talking about the lands issue as well, and you did say in your opening remarks that without land, you can't create sustainable communities or something to that effect. I was writing it down, may not be exact, but I think that's a reasonable summary. So I went on your website. I just kind of Googled your nation and news, and it just popped up on the page a picture of you that your nation has declared yet another state of emergency over public safety. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I link this to land because, you know, you need land to create this sustainable community, but you also need public safety because it's hard to grow if people are afraid. I don't know if you want to comment on this particular, because it did pop up right on the first Google search.
You're actually over time by quite a bit, so if we could get something in writing, I think that's an important thing to do as well. Thank you very much. Okay, next we have MP, what do we have? Batista. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for that. And Chief Robinson, thank you for your testimony today, and thank you, Sebastian, for bringing this to light. When you brought this up to us, we hadn't kind of understood where you were getting at with this, but I know and I see now what the challenges that you're talking about. So I'm going to ask you some very quick questions that I need very quick responses, because it's, as Parliamentary Secretary to Crown Indigenous Relations, we've sped up the ATR process based on factors. You know, we've done 39 ATRs since May of 2025. I think we're on the right track. I want to help you get on the right track. So if I ask some questions very quickly, I need some very quick answers because I got 5 minutes to do this. But have you passed a Band Council resolution that identifies the specific addition to reserve, defining the exact boundaries that you're looking for?
Negotiations, and we are not that far along in our process within the community. We have had community engagement, and we have a general idea, but part of my
Can you give me the general idea? You've got 300 members in your community. I assume that they all are living in different places. If we're trying to fast track something to get you a land base for 300 people, what is the ask? Because that's the first step, is having an ask and then allowing for the rest of the steps. So what do you believe is a reasonable ask for what to get this through?
Well, just to back it up a little here too, to get to that number, you know, we've had to do a community study, and it was a battle for us, you know, to be able to think future generations, because it's not just about us here today, it's about that future. And as you heard from the leadership that has been here too, you know, it's not just about creating a reserve for housing. You need to have land to have an economy. That's what this is all about at the end.
And I understand all that.
Yep.
I just want to get you to the fast track. We're talking about the process here. Do you have the provincial government supportive, and do you have that in writing to create, you know, a boundary for you for this reserve?
So I have spoken with Quebec, and they are waiting for us to resolve the issue with the federal government first.
And the federal government needs to know the exact boundaries, and you haven't determined those boundaries or passed a BCR outlining the first steps of additions to reserve. Is that correct?
At this point, yes.
Okay.
But we are ready to do that work when...
So it feels like we're at the first step here in terms of identifying, but you're saying it's the process of the federal government. So the second part of that process, do you have the neighboring communities and municipalities supportive of this in writing as well?
At this point, no.
Okay. So I have many more questions, Chief Robinson, but here's what I'm going to say. I don't agree with what's going on with this 200 years of waiting, and you've been in this process since 2020, and I'm the first one asking you these very specific questions in order to fast track this. I will work with your MP, who I've got a great relationship with. Let's figure out how we can get this this in place so we can get to that place, and it requires some work from the communities and the BCR, but I think after 200 years of waiting, we can figure out how to get this done and give you the best information possible with the folks behind you to get this done, at least to make some process on it during this, with the steps that we have on the addition to reserve process.
I certainly hope so.
Okay.
Okay, Deputy Lemire for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Would you like to add something, Lisa, to what has been said? Because I have a feeling that you might give us additional information.
Well, basically the ask is still the same from Wolf Lake, with all of our leaders. It is to have that secure land base, that proper recognition, because we continue to be in limbo today without it. The time is now, and we're ready to do the work, but what we need is the direction and the political will of Canada to get us to where we need to be. And these processes, like I said, we've been involved in them numerous times, been told things were going to be expedited and fast-tracked. That has not been the case. So we are looking for a comprehensive process to do this, as what was written in the mandate letter that was provided to enter into negotiations. And yeah, there's not much I can say on the negotiation front, but you know, the political will has to be there.
Quelles sont vos attentes pour les...
What are your expectations for the next stages from the federal government, and what are the recommendations that you would want this committee to put forward to help you?
So I actually will be submitting a written brief as well with some of those recommendations. I'm specifically looking at, you know, the report and the follow-up to the 2023 report regarding land and restitution and resolving these historical claims. So I'll be following up with that, and I will also be included in there, you know, more information on Wolf Lake perspective in a written brief.
Merci. Ben, en terminant, je veux effectivement...
Thank you. And as we conclude, I would like to highlight the courage that you have demonstrated, as well as the entirety of the chiefs that are around the table. We know that it impacts many other communities across Quebec and Canada, and they might be a bit less visible, but they are going through these realities, having these experiences, and it goes to show that these can be challenging situations, and it's crucial for them to thrive as communities. Thank you very much.
And we have 2 minutes left, a hard 2 minutes because of the technical difficulties, and that will go to MP Schmel.
Thank you, Chair. Like Mr. Batiste, I was a bit, I wasn't sure where we were going with this study, but now that this comes out, it actually makes sense, but it also shows that the work we do here in Ottawa can impact the area on the local level, and I want to congratulate Sebastian for putting this study forward. Grand Council Chief, the question I asked before, fire away.
Thank you for your question, MP Schmel. Within the Anishinaabe Nation, we have 39 communities. 25% of them have declared states of emergency. 100% of them are challenged with the continuous delays of government, just as described here today in this particular study. It's very relational. Canada's failure, well, Canada continues to demonstrate its dereliction in duty and dismal display of honor of the Crown, to be frank. Provinces and municipalities are third parties who Canada gives more rights to than the original title holders. That being said, it's very similar to the states of emergencies by our communities relating to public safety Canada, First Nations policing legislation, the failure of Canada to enable First Nations or to recognize First Nations and their ability to create laws for safety. Our communities on the lands are being riddled with drug dealers from larger metropolitan areas and continue to take advantage of our most vulnerable people. Again, First Nation policing legislation has been here since the 90s. My friend Chief Pavela has actually been in the court for her community's banned status since the 1900s. They only recently provided their application for mandamus in the courts in 2018, and that's as a result of the continuous delays demonstrated by the Government of Canada, continuous displays of not recognizing who the original people were. So it's very, very interrelated. There's so many correlations that can be described to that, and I'd be happy to put that into a brief for the committee.
Thank you very much.
And further describe those correlations as it relates to APR.
Thank you very much. And to all our presenters today, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. And go ahead, Deputy.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Si vous me permettez.
Thank you, Chair. If you allow me, I don't think there will be other meetings that deal directly with this issue, but the depth of the testimony we have had here is significant, and we also have seen that officials are engaged I think we can go ahead and give directions to our analysts for the redaction of this report, which maybe will not be very long, but it, I think, will be quite relevant and will have recommendations of the committee that could be made, shared with the public, made public as quickly as possible to show that there's parliamentary willingness to make progress. So I would like to suggest that we go ahead as quickly as possible with the redaction of the writing of the report, and I might have some recommendations that I could provide to you, to the analysts, if that's okay with you.
Okay, and we will be getting that report done expeditiously as well. So thank you, everyone, and have yourself a great afternoon. Chimabwich.
Merci aux interprètes.
I got to talk to these guys. Depends on them. They